everybody. Welcome to the 69th nice episode of Everyday Eternal. This is Bob Huang here with my two wonderful co-hosts, Julian and Eric. Say hi.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey everybody.
Cool. So we are here. It's been a while since kind of all of us have recorded together, maybe close to a month almost. And there are so many things that have happened. Like Wrenn-ban was banned. SCG announced they're cutting Legacy. Wizards announced a brand new format, Pioneer. So we're going to kind of go into all of these topics today. But first and foremost, I think we want to talk about Legacy and the fact that Wrenn-ban is banned. Like, what's your first reaction, Julian?
I was incredibly relieved. Like I figured it would eventually be banned, but I wasn't. I was surprised it was banned this early.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I posted somewhere. Let me try to find it. But it was like different Legacy banned cards and how long they were in the format for. And so Treasure Cruise and Mental Misstep were in the format for about 4 months, so they were the shortest. But then the next shortest was Wrenn-ban, which was like. Clearly, it was like kind of a broken card, but it was like not nearly as broken as like Misstep or Treasure Cruise, but like it just warped the format so much. But it seemed more like a Deathrite Shaman card where they could like, not ban it for a year, maybe even 2 or 3 years before they like finally pulled the trigger. But I'm so happy that they did it so early.
I was also very, very happy, except for the timing because of the GP coming up. I had spent a lot of time testing and I wasn't really expecting it. Like you guys said, I wasn't expecting it this soon. I was definitely expecting the card to be banned in Legacy, but not necessarily right before the GP. But ignoring the GP coming up, I'm very happy because I expect Legacy to be more interactive, more fun, and that is actually proving to be the case pretty quickly.
So before Wrenn-ban was banned, you were going to play Black-Red Reanimator. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process of like why you think it was good and why you think it's no longer like the best deck?
Well, actually, the week before I left for Bologna, I spent about 5 days testing Grixis Delver and had a very, very good win rate and was planning to play that.
Oh, wow. Plot twist.
Yeah. So
wait, so that's like still playable, right?
Well, yeah. So that's the thing is I spent like a weekend of doing nothing but playing Magic Online, and I mean, I play a lot of Magic Online, but this was like an intense weekend of Magic Online for me, and found the deck. I had an 88% win rate over the weekend. I played about 50 rounds, and it was great. And then I woke up on Monday and they banned Wrenn-ban, and then I started joining leagues with the same deck and found a much lower win rate, mostly because the metagame was less predictable. I was facing a lot more random decks as well as like previous meta decks like lands and death and taxes and things like that, which were harder for Grixis Delver. But yeah, it's still playable. It's still doing pretty well. I mean, I played it. I'm in Italy now, and I played a couple of tournaments, and it's been going pretty well for me. But it's
yeah, tell us about that. I know you went to 4 seasons, and I think you might have had probably the best performance out of anybody that weekend.
Yeah,
I did.
You gotta mention, right? How you're like, you sound like super depressed as if your win rate was like 40%. I think your win rate is still like right around 70% or something.
It's still pretty close to that 88%, but not so much in the leagues. I think I faced the matchups that I was facing pre-ban, which was mostly blue decks and combo decks and things like that. And then I just got a little bit lucky against some of the other decks like lands and miracles and things like that. So yeah, no, the tournaments went really well. I came to Italy. I decided to play Grixis Delver over Reanimator, which, leading back to the question you originally asked me, I will answer that. But yeah, it went really well. Like I said, I kind of got a little bit lucky against some of the harder matchups, and then everything else sort of just fell in place how I would have hoped it would against the matchups that I think are good for Grixis Delver. But the reason, basically with Reanimator, I just haven't been winning with it recently. I don't really have an explanation for it because not a lot has changed as far as a combo deck like Reanimator goes, other than it's harder for me to predict what kind of sideboard hate people will have. And I don't know, I just haven't been winning with it as much.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's something true in a newer format, right? Like people are going to be playing new different sideboard cards. I know a lot of people are playing more Veil of Summers. So I've been told Storm has a better matchup against Reanimator now because of Veil of Summer. So maybe that changed things on the margin, but
yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Like I talked to Cyrus, who's also here, and he's a little bit low on Storm's metagame right now too, for similar reasons. It's not so much that like Veil of Summer is in the Storm deck or Veil of Summer is in some other decks. Like I don't even think Veil of Summer is that particularly good against Reanimator. For Reanimator, it's more that I can't guess based on what I saw game one, which could be very little.
or guess. Nothing, literally nothing sometimes.
Right. It could be nothing, but it could also be very little. And when it was very little, I had a good chance at guessing what kind of sideboard hate my opponents would have. But now, off of very little knowledge, ignoring the nothing knowledge, like that hasn't really changed that much. But when it's very little, I could guess, if I saw a Tropical Island, there was a very good chance that they were on Rug Delver. Now, if I see a Tropical Island, it almost means nothing to me, So, and even if they are on Rug Delver, there's no telling what their sideboards look like because there isn't like a stock Rug Delver list. So not only is it hard to guess what deck they're on, it's hard to guess what kind of sideboard they are going to have.
I never realized how big of an issue like guessing correctly with regards to sideboard card is for Black Red Reanimator, because when you talk about it, it sounds like it's one of the biggest things in sideboarding.
Yeah, because you just lose to sideboard cards. So if you can't guess what kind of sideboard cards they're going to have. So like, let's say I guess that they're on Leyline and then they have Cage. I have a bunch of answers to Leyline on my sideboard, in my deck, and I have no answers to Cage and I just lose. Similarly, if I guess they're not on Cage, they're on Surgical because they're a blue deck or whatever, and then I have no answers to Cage, so I just play Cage, I lose, so I have to concede.
But then there's still game 3, right? But yeah, it sucks when you basically throw away game 2 just to get the extra information.
Right, and then game 3, it's like, well, Cage and Surgical come together, and I've just been having a really hard time.
So, did you even bring Reanimator to Bologna, or are you just committed on what you're playing now? What the fuck was that?
It was a whale.
Oh, that sounded like somebody was playing the trumpet or something in the background.
That was I'm in the Airbnb right now, and somebody must have moved a chair. But anyway, yeah, no, I brought a bunch of decks. I brought almost all of my cards because everything got shook up at the last minute. So I brought everything. So I've been testing online, but I think I don't know. I've mostly been testing Delver. It seems the strongest to me right now, at least in my experience.
So you brought up a really interesting point, which was that sometimes you see Tropical Island and you have like no idea what you could be facing. I think that's like a super interesting point I want to touch on is like what the Legacy metagame looks like now. So we've had a couple of events already. There was the Four Seasons main event, there was the MKM, and there was the Magic Online Challenge. And the results, as you might expect for week one, were extremely diverse. But the thing that stood out to me the most was, how much of a power boost green got. So like Veil of Summer was printed, Oko was printed. There's some other cards people are trying out, like Once Upon a Time. And there's actually like really compelling reasons to play green in your deck now, whereas before that was like never really the case. It was just like Tarmogoyf was not even that good. And now there's so many good green cards. So there's Rug Delver, there's Sultai Delver, there's Sultai Midrange, there's like Bant Miracles, 4-color Miracles. Julian just played against an Abomination on stream, which was like 5-color Arcanist with Supreme Verdict and the Snow Strix. It's just like it's like the Wild West, but a lot of these decks feature green, which I think is super interesting.
Yeah, is green the new blue?
Is green the new? I don't want to say it's the new blue, but it might be the new red because like every good Legacy deck was like blue red X. Now it's like, well, you can be blue red X or blue green X. So
I don't know. I'm feeling more like Julian's right that green might be the new blue mostly because of Oko. I think Oko is the new Jace, which kind of makes green the new blue.
Well, Oko's also still blue, but I definitely take your point that Oko is the new Jace, in the fact that it's the best carded. I don't even know if it's the best card advantage engine. It's the best board control card that possibly has ever been printed, and the fact that it costs 1 mana less than Jace just makes it that much more powerful.
Yeah, I was asking people on Twitter the other week whether Jace is still a tier 1 planeswalker in Legacy, and I'm actually not sure. Like, yeah, you would play Chase in these like 4 or 5 color abominations. No offense to those decks, but it really doesn't feel like Chase is a centerpiece of the deck anymore. It's just like your high end payoff and not like something you construct your entire game around resolving and protecting.
Yeah, Jace decks have changed. I do want to get into like this other topic, which I think is pretty interesting. I saw a tweet, I think it was by Chris Picula, which he was basically saying like, if permanents are the best thing to be doing in Magic, then like it's probably not good for the game. And then Ari Lax had the really insightful response that it's like, if permanents are the best thing to be doing, then what matters is playing them first, i.e. like being on the play or having acceleration. But then if spells are the best, then the best thing is like card advantage. And then if mana is the best, then it's just like whoever can have like the fast mana or play the most spells. So to me, like those are like the design issues of having cards being overpowered. Having anything being overpowered causes its own set of issues. So Wizards skewed in the past before of being like, the spells were way too good, so then Factor of Fiction was the best card because you just wanted more spells than everybody. And now they've gone in the other direction where permanents are too good and everything's just a snowball race. So I thought that was super perceptive of Ari. And it could be interesting to see if, like, hopefully R&D learned some design mistake lessons, which we should also talk about their article on play design that they put out after they had to ban all those cards in Standard. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I like that they acknowledged all the problems that happened in this year following the change in design philosophy, which at least gives you hope, and at least it helps me deal with some frustration over cards they printed. I don't know whether that we're going to see a change in that philosophy very soon. Usually, like, they plan sets ahead, something like 1 or 2 years around that. But I would hope they would make some changes to the upcoming sets and not have like an Oko slip through. To their credit, like, everybody missed Oko. Like, at least we missed Oko, and I think a lot of other people missed Oko. And we've talked about the cards and why it's good at length on the podcast, but it's really weird because you don't really feel like this card would do much against you, but it's just so hard to kill. When I played against it on the weekend, I played against Tomáš Marr at Cardmarket Prague, and he plays it and it goes to 6, and I'm like, okay, I can attack it, but then or I can play my knight, and then he pluses it, and my knight is like a 3/3 elk, and I spent my entire turn doing nothing. It's but yeah, that's with regard to play design. I think they hopefully learned their lesson that pushing power level just because people might like that is probably for the worse in the long run. I hope we won't get back to a set that has like only uninteresting, uninspired cards. I think what makes cards cool is that they are interesting and not that they're necessarily powerful. Like, powerful helps, especially if you want custom legacy. But I feel some of the stuff has just been too pushed lately, especially this year. And I'm not even sure, like, how everybody, like, I feel like the big talk on social media right now is Veil of Summer, and how everybody who could play Veil of Summer should play all the Veil of Summers they can. To the point where people even play the main deck right now. I think that like the Band Show and Tell deck is one of those decks that can actually utilize them pretty well. So I'm not saying like ban Veil of Summer because I don't really feel like it's really that disruptive, but it could be wrong. Like I gotta say, I haven't really been playing a lot of decks that really suffer any disadvantage from Veil of Summer, so I haven't really been on the receiving end of the card yet.
Yeah, I haven't felt like Veil of Summer's all that insane. Like, I see a lot of people who play Standard saying like, oh my god, like this, or Pioneer, I think they banned it, right? Saying this card needs to go, it makes it so you can't really do anything. In Legacy, it's very powerful, it's very good against Storm, it's good in Storm, but I don't think it makes it so that people don't want to play the format like some of the other formats. But Oko, I don't think that this card is the same problem or mistake as things like Wrenn-ban 6, where I think like they actually just made a mistake with Wrenn-ban 6. I think literally nobody could have guessed that the card Oko would have been as powerful as it is with the abilities that it has on it. I don't think anybody reading it or anybody testing it, maybe testing it, I don't know, but I think it's blown everybody out of the water for how much more powerful it is than what people expected.
Yeah, it's a card that all the stuff that it does isn't really overpowered, but the numbers on it are like so wrong, and you don't really get to acknowledge it until you really play against it and with it. But yeah, so yeah, what we're seeing right now in Legacy is, like Bob mentioned earlier on, I think, or Eric, you mentioned that too, how green is really making its way in the place that red used to occupy, and like all these mid-range control decks, like we had stuff like Grixis or even blue-white control decks like Miracles. They're all about green now, and that's why we see decks like Banned Miracles. I think Anorak has been playing that lately. Or, for example, Tomasz Vlacek at MKM Prague, he made top 4, or was it top 8 with, well, it's 4-color, I can't even call it Miracles, right? It's more like 4-color Mentor, and they're still splashing red for Pyroblast because it's apparently so free right now. Makes you wonder, like, how are we even supposed to punish these decks when many of these decks are even running their own versions of Back to Basics or Blood Moon in the sideboard? It's, to me, that's actually quite frustrating. I ended up cutting, for example, Choke from Green Maverick, which I'm gonna play at the cheapie, because I felt like with Astrolabe around, like they don't even care all that much about Choke, except for those random blowout scenarios where you get them. But they can even like tap their mountain and still cast Ponder.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I think on my watch list, I wouldn't really put Veil of Summer on there, but I think Arkham's Astrolabe has a lot of problems, even though the card isn't really that powerful. But the fact that it just lets you do whatever you want with mana bases, it just doesn't sit well with me. And I know you agree with me there too, Julian. But I do think that Oko is very, very good in Legacy, but we definitely need to give it some time, because it's not like Red and 6 where it was just like, if you killed Abrupticate it, they were up a land. If you Abrupticate Oko, you're like down a food, which is totally fine. And then the other thing too is Red Blast is like a reasonable card in Legacy, so I think it's a card that people can start playing like, upwards 3 or 4 copies. So I think there's a chance that Oko's just like, maybe the best walker in Legacy, but like similar to Jace in that like it'll be fine to have it around, or it might be more like Ren and 6 where it's like we really don't want this because it's in all the Delver decks and all the Jace decks. So we'll see where we end up on that. But I also did want to hear more about your testing for Bologna, Julian. You're going to play Maverick?
Yes, very much. I was considering Elves, I was considering Maverick, and I also was considering the Grixis Delver list that Eric shipped me, which worked really well for me. But yeah, I feel really good about Maverick. Now that Ren 6 is gone, there's still one I feel like there's really only one big problem left in the format for the deck, and that's Plague Engineer. And you can somewhat hedge against it. I used to play a 3-1 split on Mother of Runes and Giver of Runes. I think for the GP, I'm going to go for something like 2-2. And I might even play 2 Birds of Paradise and cut like a Noble Hierarch from it, because if you don't lose too much to the Plague Engineer, it's not that bad for you. And I feel like you've got pretty good game against all the midrange decks. Like for most of its existence, I think Maverick was one of the premier midrange decks that dominated all the other midrange decks. It's not that like that anymore. I think it's still one of the best midrange decks around. And on top of that, it's quite decent against Storm. I think Cyrus even mentioned how he's not even sure if Maverick is not even favored against Storm. Probably not. It's more like even, but it's not a matchup that I really fear. And unlike Elves, I also don't mind playing against anything with Sneak and Show, because you also get ways around that with like your Hate Bears, or even like Banishing Light, which I'm playing like 1 or 2 copies on the sideboard of, and stuff like if you play Night of Autumn. So there's really not that much stuff that you care about. And on top of that, you are pretty good, I feel, against most Delver decks. So that's where I want to be. I will probably play something like 2 Path to Exile, because Dreadhorde Arcanist is a card that I really fear. It's, like you guys mentioned earlier on, one of those scenarios where games can snowball out of control super quickly. That's why I really want to take that card out. That's something I'm hard targeting. And the rest, I feel like you're somewhat weak to something like Hogak or even Dredge. And that's why I'm playing 5 copies of Dredge Hate in the sideboard. I'm actually playing 2 copies of Tomad's Crypt, because I feel that card is so much better than Surgical Extraction against, well, actually both of those decks, but especially Hogak. And yeah, This is. I didn't expect to feel this good about Maverick. I actually only played 3-3 in Prague before I dropped, but that didn't really feel like I hadn't like made a deck construction error or something like that would discourage me from playing the deck. I also won my grand trial, which gave me 2 buys, so that worked pretty well. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing Maverick and telling you guys next week how I went like 0-6 drop.
Well, okay. Are you splashing any colors?
No, I considered it, but the only thing you would really splash is black for discard, and I don't really feel like I want that right now.
Well, it would be discard, Plague Engineer, possibly Abrupt Decay, but that would be more of a less of a splash and more of a main color then.
Yeah, Abrupt Decay is the one thing that I'm missing, because when I played against Oko, it was very loco. It didn't really enjoy that too much. Something I noticed is that Scavenging Ooze is actually not that bad against Oko, because it still keeps its counter, so it's actually quite big.
That's fair. I don't know. To me, it seems like, well, you literally posed the scenario where it was like you went Knight and they went Oko, or they went Oko first, and then you're like, okay, well, this Knight is useless. So to me, I think you need a I think Oko is like the new Wrenn-ban 6. It's not as played as Wrenn-ban 6 yet, but maybe in the next couple of months it will be, and maybe by Bologna, like some of the best players will have figured out that Oko is what you want to be doing. So if I were you, I would come up with a plan for Oko for sure.
Yeah, something I did that I didn't do in Prague, because I felt like it doesn't really match up well with the play patterns of Maverick, which often taps out and doesn't really have good untap effects like Alpha has. In Prague, I wasn't playing Veil of Summer, and now I basically have like 2 slots in the sideboard, maybe 3, that are somewhat dedicated to beating these mid-range control decks. Most of them play Oko. It used to be Choke. Like I would sometimes often play 3 Choke, and that card has been incredibly underwhelming for me, and that's why I'm cutting Choke. And that's basically the only card I'm not so sure about right now, whether I want to play Veil of Summer, because it's still quite cool if you have extra mana and you play, I don't know, Stormforge Mystic, and they try to Oko it, and then you play Veil of Summer, and then they have to answer the Veil of Summer as well. And if they do that, you still have a 3/3 at least. So there's good scenarios that involve Veil of Summer. Overall, it's not that great of a card, but on top of that, it also doubles as combo hate, which isn't that easy because you can't really keep the mana up all the time. But I mean, that's why I'm also playing 2 to 3, probably 3 copies of Deafening Silence, so I can have like interaction turn 1.
Oh, that card's always kind of stood out to me. I don't think it's seen that much play, but like it seems like a no-brainer in like decks like Maverick and Death and Taxes. Has it been good?
Actually, the sound cut off. I actually didn't hear the card.
Deafening Silence.
Yeah, the card has been incredibly good. Like, I would say that's the card I underestimated the most. I remember when we talked about it in the preview episode of on the spoiler episode. I felt like, yeah, it's playable. It's just like so niche, and I gotta say, after playing with it, and I think that's like, to me, a prime example of, okay, actually go ahead and play with the card, look at it, but also play with it to form your opinion. That card has been super, super good for me, like incredibly good. It has so many more applications than I figured it would. For example, you play against Infect, and suddenly you can actually wait for their turn, and if they want to play like a pump spell, you can Swords to Plowshares and Response, and there's nothing they can do. Or you play, I mean, there's the obvious scenario against Omniscience where they have to pass the turn, and that's good for you. But there's also stuff like that, I don't know, they put Grizzlebrand into play, and you just, I don't know, they also have to pass the turn because there's nothing they can do, and you can Caracas it, and yeah, they can draw the cards, but sometimes you can just like out-tempo them, and there's a lot of applications for the card that I wasn't aware of, on top of being good against Storm, and that's why I really like the card, because it also gives you turn 1 interaction, which Maverick and Death and Texas used to lack.
But you wouldn't bring it in against like a fair blue deck, would you?
No. I mean, actually, it doesn't even stop Snapcast damage, right? It says non-creature or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's still for combo,
like,
but it's been very good against combo.
Yeah. Very. I liked it a lot.
Cool. So, looking at our kind of show topics, I don't know, is there more you guys want to say? Like, maybe we should do GP Bologna, like, predictions for what you guys think is going to top 8?
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to hear what you guys think it would be good decks to play right now, or like even good strategic approaches. There's sometimes like, should I splash Red Blast for? Is it worth it? And I guess right now it is. Is there any way that you guys see that somebody could actually go ahead and try to punish the mana bases of those greedy decks? I mean, the obvious answer to basically answer my own question here is like something like Moonstompy, but like most Moonstompy players I know that they're not that happy about their deck because they feel like, oh, it's actually not that great against Death and Taxes, and when the opponent goes first and they go turn 1 Astrolabe, it's also not that great, and that even like involves them getting a moon in the first place, which doesn't always happen.
It's also
anything
a bad
else
deck.
You guys see? It's also a bad deck.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I've been playing Stifle, and it's not a foolproof way to punish mana bases, but it is one way to punish all mana bases, because there aren't any decks that don't play fetch lands, and so if you can...
Well, Chalice decks, but for the most part, yeah.
Right.
Death and Taxes as well.
Blue decks. We're talking about punishing mana bases of the blue decks, though.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so it works against all of the blue decks, and it works against Maverick, and it works against Step. So it does punish most mana bases. It can be a little bit tricky to get it to do that, and it doesn't always work, but for me, it seems to be working pretty well. And the other thing I've noticed about like Astrolabe decks is that they often, against a Wasteland deck, they will often fetch up potentially very awkward mana bases because they have Astrolabe. So if you can then answer their Astrolabe, it really sets them back a lot. So there are certain cards that are worthwhile to do that with, and certain cards that are not. Like I've seen people using a Braid, which I think is not worth a card against Astrolabe because, I mean, it's 2 mana and they've drawn a card off of it. But I think like Abrupt Decay potentially is, I mean, not Abrupt Decay, sorry. Cooligan's Command, because it has a second mode, and also potentially Null Rod if you see things like Engineered Explosive. So if there's like a secondary use for it for the Null Rod, then I think Null Rod is, and otherwise Cooligan's Command, getting a card off of it as well, can mean that if you let them kind of set up their mana base in a really awkward way because they have the Astrolabe, then you can kind of punish them in that way.
Yeah, I noticed some green decks are playing Collector Oof too. Yeah.
Yeah, Collector Oof is a card. I always wonder whether I should bring it in against these snow decks, and I don't, because like Eric mentioned, you usually want there to be another thing, and maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should bring it in specifically against those 4 and 5 colors.
Well, I think if you're playing elves, it doesn't make sense because you don't really tax their mana. But if you're playing Delver, maybe it makes more sense, like Rug Delver against snow.
Yeah, well, Oof attacks, so I think that's your second thing. The fact that it can attack for 2, I think that is your second thing. So if you have a second thing, I think it's worth attacking the Astrolabe. But if it's like a Braid, I don't think is, because there is no actual second thing. You're still just...
So you guys think it would make sense for me to bring like my one of Oof in Maverick? Because I wonder, like I could actually see that because it also pressures Oko, right? And if they plus it, then you can still pressure Oko, which is nice. But something okay, so maybe you guys can help me, and maybe all the other ones listening who are having similar problems. When I'm playing against these 4-color snow decks, especially when they're bug-based, for example, the 5-color snow deck that Thomas Schmar is playing is like bug-based, and then splashes white for like 2 slots of Plowshares and Teferi, and red for Pyroblasts. I always wonder, should I either like side out more humans, or should I side out my Swords to Plowshares? Because traditionally, like these decks play, what are they playing? They play like Snapcaster Mage and Baleful Strix, and you feel like, oh my god, my Swords to Plowshares, they're getting no value at all. But at the same time, you kind of want removal for the Plague Engineer, and I guess that's also where like a potential Black Splash comes in for Abrupt Decay, because that also takes care of Oko, so I guess that's an option. But if you're playing green-white, I used to keep my Swords to Plowshares, at least like 3 copies, but in the matches I played, they felt so bad that now I think it's probably worth it changing my deck construction to playing more Birds of Paradise and Giver of Ruins. And so I can actually side out at least 3 copies of my Swords to Plowshares just because they're so bad in the matchup. Like the only scenario where I can imagine that outside of hitting Engineer, which probably even killed a couple of your creatures already, is where you remove an Elk from the other side and attack a Planeswalker. But that's so rare and doesn't really work that well. So yeah, maybe I should just have more beaters that are not humans.
Yeah, or you should try the Black Splash.
Maybe that's what I'm gonna do tonight. Like, we're actually recording this on the night before I leave for Bologna, so if you're listening to this, I'm probably on the train already. I
don't really know Maverick well enough to really say, but I think as far as spells go, the best way to fight back against Planeswalkers is Red Blast or Pyroblast or whatever. I think that's your cleanest and best answer because it answers them on the stack as well as in play. And like I think Bob mentioned, if they get a food token, like that's not that big of a deal. It's really like the third activation, or like when they turn one of your creatures into elk and then they turn one of their artifacts into an elk, like the game's basically over. So it's like 2 activations. But if they just make a a food token, and then they either turn their food token into a 3/3 or turn one of your things into a 3/3, that's not the end of the world. So you have a couple turns to blast, and it's like a 1 mana spell. So I think blasts are the best answer to Oko, and that's like the main planeswalker in the format at this point.
Okay, so yeah, let's go to, I guess, our predictions for the GP. I'll start. I think Delver's going to be good. It's super interesting because it's unclear to me what the best Delver deck is. I know at NKM Prague, Blue-Red Delver was the most played, and there was one in the top 8. But I like Blue-Red Delver if mana bases are going to be taxed, and like Delver's really good. And if that's true, I think Blue-Red usually has the edge because now it has like Brazen Borrower to like answer Gormag Angler and Tarmogoyf. So it has just the best mana base. So if Delver's going to be big, I like Blue-Red Delver. If the other combo decks are going to be bigger, then I might like something more like Bug Delver or Grixis Delver, or potentially even Rug Delver because that can play Oko. So I think like all 4 of those Delver decks are good, and I'm really curious to see which one rises to the top. So I think I'll probably say maybe 2 or 3 Delver in the top 8. I'll go with 3, and then maybe like 2 like Oko mid-range decks. And then maybe a Chalice deck, and I'll pick the Crazy Urza Chalice deck. And then probably 2 combo decks, maybe a Depths deck, which I think is still really good, and then Sneak and Show. So that's my pick.
Yeah, I feel like, especially Depth, people don't really talk about it all that much anymore, right? But the deck is still really, really good, and it rewards, well, I guess, reward a skill. I was trying to come up with something that doesn't sound as pretentious as, oh, this is like skill.
It rewards experience and skill, I guess.
That sounds much better. Yeah, I guess experience breeds skill or something like that. But yeah, I noticed myself when I was like playing the deck on Magic Online for a while, man, I was lacking experience in so many situations to try to figure out how to navigate my way through it. And I think people who are really, really good with the deck, they will certainly like crush a lot of weak opposition, and that's probably going to happen to a lot of people at the GP. With regards to the Delver decks, I totally agree. It's going to be interesting how things eventually are going to work out. I think, Eric, you mentioned how, for example, Grixis Delver, especially the one you've been posting lately, is really, really good in those mirror matches. And to me, like I've said that before, I think maybe Grixis Delver is the quote-unquote best deck in the format right now, just because it's so incredibly versatile. And also, like, I always appreciate it very much when a deck, especially in a big event where you're playing a ton of rounds, is applying a lot of pressure, because that way you get to capitalize on your opponent struggling or like making easy mistakes. And yeah, that's why I was considering playing Grixis Delver as well. And yeah, that's something I'm seeing. I also think that Show and Tell, especially Banned or even Blue-Green, but probably Banned Show and Tell, will probably do well. Maybe not with regards to how many people are playing it, because it's like a very special thing that only came up recently. But for example, Johannes Gupro top 8'd the GP, he wishes, the MKM Prague with it. And from what I had been watching, the deck looked really, really solid. And it's just kind of cool, right? These Sneak and Show decks, they didn't really struggle all that much with having their stuff countered. They often had issues with like hymns and discard spell and how annoying those were. And now they have, well, I think he had like 3 Veil of Summers or something, or did he have them in the sideboard? Oh, okay, so only had 3 in the sideboard. So the one I played against in China had like 3 in the main. And yeah, that's a pretty good deck that I can see rising to the top as well. And honestly, just because of numbers, at least is Death in Texas. There's probably going to be Death in Texas, like a copy or something in the top 8, because it's such a popular deck and people enjoy it so much. Actually, let me pull up the numbers. Yeah, it was the second most played deck at Prague at 10%, Blue-Red Delver at 11%. Storm was the third most played deck. It was like something like 248 players, not 250, because that would have unlocked the higher price payout. Huh, it's too bad. So bad that keeps happening at almost every event. But yeah. Looking at the rest, I think Hogak is really good. So I'm talking more about like which decks I think are really good. There's probably not too many people playing Hogak, so I'm not sure if it's gonna top 8 or something. Obviously, that's like always just like a small thing, right? The difference between something like 30th and top 8 is sometimes just a match win. But yeah, I think Hogak is really good, and that's going to do well. One last deck that I've been wondering about, actually 2. The first one is Miracles, but thus far it looks like this traditional blue-white Miracles has been replaced with like Greed Miracles, sometimes even dropping Terminus. But the other deck I'm wondering about is Eldrazi, like straight up in your face Eldrazi Stompy, not post Eldrazi, straight up turn 1, what's it called? The dude, the copies, turn 2, Thought Not Seer, turn 3, Smasher you, while you're dawdling around with your Okos and stuff. And I don't know, I could see that being something that could be really good because it's just like, so I don't care about your stuff, come at me. And it can quickly crumble, I guess, if you've got good answers to it, but I don't know, people are getting really cute, and the deck is also playing Wastelands and putting a lot of pressure up. So maybe something like that, or even Eldrazi in Texas, which I noticed that people playing those snow decks, they fear Thalia more than anything. So that's why I also upped Thalia to a 4. In my Maverick deck, I usually play 3. I think I've resolved almost no Thalia against them because that's the only thing they ever force. So something like that could also be good.
Yeah, and so I agree with a lot of what you guys are saying. I think that Delver continues to probably be the best strategy in the format, and I think for Delver strategies, I think that the ones that play Bolt are the ones that are doing it correctly, and I expect to see probably a minimum of 2 Delver decks in the top 8 that play Bolt. I think that the bug ones and the 4-color ones that aren't playing, or I guess the 4-color ones will be playing Bolt, but anyway, I think the bug ones are they're more control-y decks that happen to be playing Delver, and I think they're not the best Delver strategy. So I expect either UR Delver or Grixis Delver to see some number in the top 8 above 1. I expect probably 2 or 3. And then I actually think second behind that for best decks in the format are probably Astrolabe decks, blue-white based Astrolabe decks, either based Terminus Miracles or Mentor based with no Terminus and like one Supreme Verdict, I think are probably the second best. And I don't think there's that many good combo decks in the format, and I don't expect to see that many in the top 8. And if we do see any, I think it'll either be Hogak or Dredge. And if it's Hogak, I think they just happen to hit the right matchups all day. And Dredge, it has to be like one of the best Dredge players out there probably playing it and just having a good day. So I think for the rest of the format, I think, like Julian said, I think Death and Taxes is actually pretty well positioned, but Death and Taxes has the problem of being a non-blue, non-cantrip deck. So we'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if we see one copy of that in the top 8.
Yeah, it usually makes up for it in numbers, right? It's like I mentioned, it's always one of the most played decks, so somebody's gonna get there.
Right.
It's something that you mentioned to us, like in our chat earlier on, I think, was that it's interesting how all the, well, quote-unquote, specialists are not playing their special deck anymore. Like, you know how you're known for Black Red Delver, or I'm playing Elves, or even, I think, Cyrus was very, very much considering not playing Storm, and I think he will probably do so now, but he was, like, very close to playing Death in Texas, right? And he might have actually done that had he not, like, missed all those win and ends at the four-season tournament.
Yeah, it sounded like he was really expecting himself to play Death and Taxes, and then he lost 3 win and ends, and now he's saying he's probably going to play Storm. I saw him doing some crazy stuff with his sideboard for testing, and I mean, I think Cyrus is probably the best Storm player out there, at least at the tournament, and I think it's not a bad choice for him, but he definitely doesn't think it's as well positioned as it's been in the Wrenn and 6 meta.
Yeah, you know how people talk about the Cyrus Storm cycle? I don't know if he likes it or doesn't like it, but like how he always like, oh, Storm is dead, then he changes everything. And eventually he arrives back at the most stock list and then he crushes a tournament. I wonder if that's going to happen here, or whether he's going to have something like, I don't know, people played Phyrexian Obliterator against me the other day out of Storm, and it certainly obliterated me like crazy. That was something I didn't expect.
And I've seen some crazy things with my Reanimator opponents too, where I'm like, I don't know if that's where I would go. I think I'd probably just play a different deck. But as far as the Cyrus Storm cycle goes, I saw Cyrus at the Four Seasons, and at the end of the day, I saw him buying a playset of Young Pyromancers and sleeving them up, and then telling me that he thinks Young Pyromancer and 4 Empty the Warrens might be where Storm needs to be.
4 Empty the Warrens. What is this Belcher now?
I don't know. Hey, I mean, Veil of Summer is a thing, and it's a problematic card for Storm, and Empty the Warrens doesn't care about Veil of Summer.
Oh, actually, that's something, because I want to try to give people who are listening to this on their way to the tournament. some things that we noticed in the metagame that not everybody might be aware of. And I think, yeah, Storm actually relies even more than it used to on empty the burns. So I've been burned by that before when I started out via Stoneforge and Batterskull, because I felt like, oh, this is not very good against Storm, and then suddenly there's like 8 goblins facing me down there, like Gadoktik and Mother of Runes, which actually might do it, but but yeah, you get the idea, right? So I'm siding out most of my equipment, but I'm keeping Stoneforges and Batterskull just because of that, because one of the ways they try to get around my hate bears lately has also been that they just try to make a ton of goblins on the first or second turn. And yeah, that's definitely something to be aware of. So if you're constructing your sideboard and you're like on the fence about a couple of cards, if those cards can deal with goblins, that's probably more value than it used to be, especially if you're playing Veil of Summer and your opponent's gonna try to play around that. So definitely be aware of that. Are there any other trends that you guys have picked up on? For example, like I mentioned before, I feel like Choke is really not very good as a sideboard card, or like Eric mentioned, if you can have something in the sideboard that deals with the Astrolabe in a way that's profitable for you, for example, as in either being a creature or having some other applications. Is there anything else that you feel right now that you really want to do with your deck or your sideboard with regards to flex slots?
Yeah, I can't really think of any other ones. I mean, we talked about Red Blast being good, so I would show up. If I were playing Delver, I'd play 3. If I were playing Jace deck, I'd maybe play 4. So I'm pretty high on that. But I've been playing Depths. I added Once Upon a Time. I'm still not 100% convinced it's like necessarily that much better than Sylvan Scrying. It's like it's more powerful than Scrying, but then sometimes you can draw it later in the game and then it doesn't find you what you want, and that feels bad. So I'm not sure about the correct way to build Depths, but I think Depths is very good again because Dark Confidant is very good again. You don't really want it that much against the Delver decks that pressure your life total, but against every other deck, Dark Confidant is just like absurdly good. So I'm very in on playing Depths, so I would definitely play that if I went to the GP. However, I also will say that like I have been losing more to the green decks, because the green decks sometimes they still play Crop Rotation Caracas, and sometimes they play like Oko and Gilded Goose and Icefang Coatl. And sometimes if you just like set up a blocker and then plus an Oko on my Merit Lodge, then it's just like I can't really win. So I think it's definitely possible that Depths is like not the way to go, but I'm still like beating all the other decks. However, if like the green Oko decks get bigger, then I might have to, switch plans or move to a different deck.
Yeah, good point. Something that I just thought of as well. I guess that goes back to what's it called? Oof, Collector Oof. If your deck could play Nylrod, I think Nylrod is also pretty good right now because it's got that extra value against Storm. It also used to be pretty good against Storm, right? But now a lot of people, I saw Martin Wonasek and a lot of other Storm players at MKM Prague, they were all playing Wishclaw Talisman, like sometimes as a 2 or 3 off. And shutting that one off on top of shutting off all the artifact mana is probably like a really good thing. I know that Travis mentioned on the cast the other month that he almost always plays like a single copy of Nylrod in his decks that can support it, because it's just like such high value, and now the value got even higher. So yeah, that's a card that I got in mind.
It's really good against Death and Taxes too, and that's like a deck again. Yeah. So I mean,
I think Nylrod's better than it was when Jarvis was on. Jarvis was mostly, I think, giving it a nod as a silver bullet against Storm back then. But now I think it's even better, as Bob was just saying. It's like if you're playing Delver, it's one of your must-draw things against Death and Taxes, and it's also very good against what I think is probably the best Chalice deck in the format right now, which somebody else mentioned, I think Bob, which is the Urza Chalice decks, the decks that play Echo of Eons and LED. It's very good against those decks as well.
Yeah, let me talk about that deck for just a second here. That deck is like another crazy abomination. We have the crazy 5-color abominations, but we also have this crazy Chalice deck that is literally 2019 Magic cards and design errors plus like fast mana. So it's like 2 fundamental design mistakes lumped together. And I've played against this deck, and it is scary because basically they play 4 Narset, 4 Karn, 4 Urza, LEDs. And like it's just so easy for them to go like Narset into like Echo Vion's LED, like Time Twister you, and then you discard your hand. It just like eventually they assemble that if you let them keep playing Magic. And that deck is just extremely powerful. The only reason I don't think it's like broken is that it's pretty vulnerable to like hate pieces like Null Rod. It's not good against Chalice on 0, and like it's even a little bit vulnerable to Red Blast. So I don't think it's necessarily like going to dominate the format, but I think it's very, very powerful.
That deck is really scary. Like the other day, I think they even played turn 1 Narset against me, and then they went LED Echo of Eons, and the game ended. If you're not like having any way to interact with that, and like the more traditional ways outside of Force of Will, they don't even do all that much. Like Surgical, you can't really hit the Echo of Eons if they discard it to LED. So that's scary. I think Caleb Whitefaces actually did a lot of work on it and was considering it for the GP. I was wondering, does the deck actually play Force of Will? Does it even have enough blue cards
does
to
not.
support Force of Will? Oh, okay.
No,
so at least that's okay. Cool. I was seeing the deck on the weekend as well, and it was a different version. It was played by actually very famous European Legacy player Shirshi Tuma, and he played it in a top deaf shell, so it was much more grindy. It played Emery, Lurker of the Lock, and tried to assemble Ursa and the top deaf Foundry thing for infinite top deaths and life gain. And that deck also looked really, really good, but I think the explosiveness of the other version is just like what would draw me towards that. But yeah, Emery is a card I've been excited about for a long time. I think the explosive one also does play Emery, right?
Yeah, they both play Emery. Yeah, I don't know. I think that deck has a lot of potential. Maybe they're still trying to figure out the best way to build it, and maybe someone will show up with a good build in Bologna. So we'll see.
I think experience with the deck and stuff too, because I've played against it a lot, and I feel like a lot of people are just really excited to discard their hand and cast Echo of Eons, and that makes it very, very easy to beat. And when people play it slightly differently, where they don't just go all in all the time on Echo, it's much easier. It's much harder. It's much harder to play against when they're not doing that. So I think that the deck definitely has a lot of potential in the format, and like I said, I think it might be the best Chalice deck. But I think that the whole LED Echo thing has a pretty strong vulnerability against Force of Will if you don't have like a lot of experience playing the deck and you just go all in all the time.
Right. Caleb was mentioning that he was thinking about playing some defense grids just because he felt like he needed a little bit more against Force of Will, so that kind of makes sense to me too.
Yeah, I've been seeing defense grids as well.
I guess it's another deck where I'm really happy about Deafening Silence, if I'm on the play at least.
Sure.
Yeah, because then Echo is not so scary. Like, you don't really care if they Echo if they have to pass the turn. Their deck is kind of filled with like a lot of air, to be honest. Like I've definitely beat many Echoes as long as Narset's not in play.
I mean, we're saying that now, and not like fast forward a week, and we're going to see like 3 copies in the top 8 or something. But yeah, it's right. You're right. The deck has built-in vulnerability, and I hope it's not gonna become. I guess if it becomes even bigger, we will probably see something happening to it. But it's just like a very scary deck. I think over the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot of what I want to call improved versions of Belcher in the format that can either like do the broken stuff, but also play a little bit at least of a longer game than Belcher traditionally used to do.
Yeah, that's very much what it feels like to me. It's like an extremely improved version of Belcher, where like Belcher had 2 lines, which both just required you to make a bunch of mana, and one of which was Force of Will proof, and the other one wasn't, which is like Belcher / Empty the Warrens. You can't really force Empty the Warrens, but you can force Belcher. But this deck, like, it's very hard to pick your forces, because they could just play a few artifacts and then play out Emery, and then they get to just start casting all their stuff from their graveyard. But you can like removal's live there where it isn't against Belcher. But at least it like the Emery Echo Urza deck, it gets to play Magic for many turns, while like Belcher doesn't really get to do that. So
yeah, I guess that's our thoughts for the GP, for the metagame. Is there anything you want to add, Bob? Anything that stuck out to you?
No, that sounds good to me. I did want to switch gears a little bit and talk about. I know you guys already talked a little bit last cast with James about SCG cutting legacy. I do want to kind of come back to that and kind of talk about different things that are kind of happening. So, like in my local community, for instance, There's a new tournament series that's starting up by the Pit, and they're going to be streaming a lot of their events. I know Jeremy Aronson from Missouri MTG is like coming out of retirement to like create a really big tournament in St. Louis again next year. I don't know.
Is he? Because sorry for interrupting you, but I was told that he had stopped doing that, and like people were working towards bringing that back. So is that actually coming back? That sounds great.
Yeah, he's like pretty sure he's going to run it again. He's already been like polling people for like what kind of format in terms of like prize pool and an entry fee. So I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And I didn't go last year, but if there's like no SCGs, there's a strong chance I would consider going next year. And I don't know how much you know about, like, I know you were telling me that Pioneer, which I think we want to talk about too, but kind of Pioneer and Legacy were going to be on the same day for the MKMs next year. So I guess MKM's still supporting Legacy, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, they're getting really decent turnouts for Legacy, right? If you consider that it's the weekend before the GP, where a lot of people don't really want to travel, and there was a big tournament in Italy going on, getting basically 250 people for an MKM in Prague is really good. Like, I would have expected it to be less, and I'm really happy to see that kind of support. And yeah, it's gonna remain probably their second biggest main event in the next year. It always used to be the biggest one, then Modern took over, and now Legacy still is by quite a fair margin their second biggest event of the weekend.
Yeah. Do you think I think there are like two big reasons I think that Legacy turnout has kind of gone down. I think one reason is just the fact that the Legacy players have like aged, and a lot of them are having kids and not getting to play as much anymore. And I think the secondary reason is like the newer players are usually in their early 20s, and Legacy cards have gone up so much in the past 5 years that it's even harder for those newer like early 20s players to get in. Like, I think those are like the two factors I see, and obviously it's kind of like the reserve list, but I don't know, I'm curious on your thoughts as to like where Legacy goes from here, especially like what if there's no Legacy GP next year? I mean, I hope that doesn't happen, but like I mentioned, a lot of local stores are going to kind of step up, but like, where do you guys see Legacy going if there's no major support?
I mean, I think that it is inevitable that it's going to end up being kind of like vintage based on the card prices. But I mean, another factor beyond what you just mentioned, I think a lot of people kind of liked that Legacy didn't change that frequently. Like, people could play their Canadian Threshold deck or their Miracles deck or their Pox deck or whatever it was, and they could only play in, a local event once every couple months or like one big event a year, but then like not have to worry about the format changing that much. But I think in the last year, like the format is just changing so drastically and so rapidly that it's almost like trying to keep up with the standard format. So I think that's another factor.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I always also felt like that people, I mean, it's a meme for some people to hate on standard because standard is bad, yada yada. But I think when I say I don't like standard, it's not even about which cards are legal. It's often about, hey, I want to play competitive, but I feel like standard is changing almost like every other week, and then you have to adjust your sideboard and stuff. And a lot of us, we don't really have the time to really keep up with that. And you also don't want to show up to an event where you feel like, oh, my deck is like completely out of touch with the metagame. And that's why it's so nice to basically step away from Legacy for like, I don't know, a couple months. And then most of the stuff that you know about the format hasn't really changed all that much. Sometimes there's like a new thing coming in, maybe two. But now we had like new stuff coming in almost I want to say almost every month. Like, I don't even know how much stuff was released this year. It just felt like too much. And yeah, I certainly see that. Like, even personally in our group, we had someone who really enjoys playing Chunt. And then, well, they got Wrenn-ban 6, and they were like, okay, hey, I can actually play Chunt. And that's like, hey, Wrenn-ban 6 is banned. And now they're like, they talked about either quitting Magic for good because that was like so frustrating to them. And it's interesting. They're actually looking into playing Pioneer now. So that's something that some people are looking into right now, including me, right? And I guess you guys are also. I mean, no, at least Bob, right? You're also pretty interested in that.
Mm-hmm. I think Pioneer might become my main format next year, especially if they don't announce any GPs. I don't know. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, I was really high on Pioneer. I was like, "Oh, this format's great. It's interactive. There's like not too many combo decks. There's a couple, but it's not like overwhelming, and like the games are interesting." But then now I've like kind of gotten depressed about the format for the past 2 weeks. I don't know if you saw the last PTQ results, but it was like 16 mono black aggro decks and like 10 field of the decks, and it's just like I'm worried about Pioneer because like R&D has just printed so many design mistakes that I don't know how many cards they need to ban for Pioneer to be a good format. Like I feel like it's always going to be pretty play draw dependent, just based on the fact that like the permanents they've printed are so damn good now. So like it's just really, really important to be on the play, and it's been that way in Standard for years. And I'm just worried that Pioneer is just going to be like even more play draw dependent than Legacy. Legacy, I actually like. They've just printed such good tools. Like they printed Force of Negation, like also obviously Force of Will Wasteland, and just the answers. I still think the gameplay in Legacy is a lot better than Pioneer and Modern. Pioneer, like I said, it's about being on the play. Modern, it's about like finding whatever uninteractive linear strategy people aren't ready for. But Legacy, at its fundamental, is still just like a fairly interactive format where like, yeah, you have some people who are trying to Grizzlebrand you or some people who are trying to like Chalice you, but usually if you have your interaction line up, then you're actually better off. So you're rewarded for interacting in Legacy, and I'm just not sure that's going to be true in Pioneer or Modern anytime soon.
What have you been playing in Pioneer? Did you like try a couple of decks, or is there something you tried to make work?
I tried a few decks. I actually went 6-2 in the last mocks, so I'm qualified for like the mocks playoffs. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I've been playing Simic Stompy, which is basically 8 land or elves for Once Upon a Time. So you always have a turn 1 elf, and then you go turn 3 like a broken 3-drop like Lovestruck Beast or Ronus or Oko, and then you just like you get off on the front foot, and then you have like Stubborn Denial to like stop whatever they're gonna do. So that deck has felt pretty good, but obviously Mono Black and Field of the Dead are kind of dominating Pioneer. I just worry about the format because I don't know if it'll ever be a balanced format.
You just gave me a really good idea for Legacy.
What's that?
Remember Bant Stoneblade with the Deathrite Shamans and the Noble Hierarchs, and how having a mana dork was like the most important thing? Why don't we just play it Once Upon a Time and Bant Stoneblade? Then we don't need Deathrite Shaman.
Well, the problem with that is I think you really need 8 mana dorks and 4 Once Upon a Times. So what are you going to play for your 8 mana dorks? You can play 4 Noble Hierarchs. What else are you going to play?
Gilded Goose.
That is probably the second best one. No, honestly, no. I would believe you now if you just told me that was a deck. Is that like 8 mana dorks, 4 Once Upon a Time, 4 Okos, and then like True Name. Yeah, True Name makes sense to me. Maybe a Teferi, Time Raveler. No, that sounds pretty good to me already.
It's gonna be great.
We're gonna call it the Everyday Eternal. Actually, that's a really bad name for a Legacy deck. Are there like some American cereals that are not yet taken by any of the combo deck names? Actually, we're not a combo deck in the first place. Okay, I'm bad at naming decks. I'm gonna stick to Elves and Maverick.
No, that actually is a pretty good Legacy deck idea. It's worth exploring more. Gilded Goose is like if you can make more food tokens via Oko. Like it actually, gaining 3 life a turn or making a food every turn is like not horrible for your mana dork in the late game.
I'm gonna try it. Sounds great. The problem is I think True Name isn't as good as a threat as it used to be. So like if your payoff is Oko is great, but you can't Once Upon a Time for it. And True Name I think isn't quite as powerful as it was in the Deathrite Shaman meta. Like True Name plus Jite or whatever was just like great in Deathrite Shaman meta, but now it's like True Name is. People are mostly cutting True Names out of the deck completely. That card is just not that great.
So you could play like if you played black, you play Leovold. You could play like your own Plague Engineers. Trying to think of like what the best 3-drops in Legacy are, but
yeah, I guess Plague Engineer kind of gives you some
great
tools.
Glass Spinner, and when they try to Oko it, you draw a card. No, actually you don't. It gets countered. But yeah, that's bad. You could play Knight. I don't know.
You could play Knight.
Yeah.
You could play Elvish Reclaimer as well if you're going down that route.
Mm-hmm. The Knight of the Reliquary land package, but with Reclaimer. Nobody's found a shell for that yet. People have tried like a couple of them in Delver shells and things like that, but nobody's really found a use for for Elvish Reclaimer is like a solid Knight of the Reliquary on turn one.
Yeah, I think in Delver, like Tarmogoyf is just going to be better than Elvish Reclaimer most of the time. Like you just don't have the space to play the utility lands, and Tarmogoyf is just like a bigger threat.
Yeah, I think people experimented with it in the old Ruck diver lists, where it sometimes used to go in place of Hexdrinker and stuff. But yeah, I guess that's gone. The only other application for the card I see is when people were trying it in green-white Dark Depth, which like Dark Depth / Maverick, which has worked decently. I actually could see that deck doing well-ish, but I haven't really played too much with it. I only played against it and it seemed solid.
But yeah, going kind of back to the topic of Pioneer, like, do you guys see yourselves playing this format a lot going forward?
Yes, but I agree. I would want to see how it shakes out. Like, I don't really want to get a deck. Like, for example, Mono Black aggro was interesting me quite a bit because I like these aggro / mid-range approaches, and I also have some cards for it. And I don't know, the deck speaks to me, even though I'm probably like I like green, and actually green decks a lot more. But yeah, but for now I'm not sure what vision actually Wizards has for the format. For example, when they created Modern, they clearly said this is a format where you cannot kill before the 4th turn. I guess we all know how that worked out, but I feel if Wizards could make it clear what they're trying to do with the format, that would be good. Like they banned some stuff, for example, well, mostly stuff out of the mono green deck because it was just so busted. And I think that's probably an episode for itself, but I always feel like formats are good when there's a deck that sets an upper limit to what you can do. For Legacy, usually that's Delver. Delver tells you, okay, if you play a 4-drop, it has to win you the game. You cannot like play a casual 4-drop and be like dirtly with it. And stuff like that, right? And your 3-drops have to be really, really good. And I feel like when stuff like that happens, you don't need to ban a lot of cards. I think you would, if you had something like that interacted with like the broken stuff in a way that either counters discards or something, probably counters the big payoff spells, then a lot of decks are going to be left with a bunch of like 1/1s that produce mana, and that's it. Basically the way it works in Legacy, right? Just in Legacy we have this thing in Elves that those 1/1s actually still have some synergies, whereas in I think Pioneer they don't have too many. But yeah, I feel like Pioneer, and I could be very wrong about it. Like I only thought about it like the last couple of weeks. Pioneer could be really good if it had a blue tempo based deck that really caps and defines what you are able to do in the format, and then you build the format around that. That defines which combo decks are playable. That in turn defines which anti-combo mechanisms you gotta employ in your decks. And yeah, also to a certain degree, I guess you must be able to hate on lands, even though, especially during the last decade, that hasn't been really a very popular thing. Like, I mean, we went from having literal Stone Rain and Wasteland in Magic to having like a 5-mana spell that makes your opponent sacrifice a land or something. So I'm having a hard time seeing that happening, and it's I guess it's part of the tempo strategy. I just feel like as much as can be frustrating playing against something like Delver with Daze and Wasteland, in the long run, it's a force of good to the format it's legal in. And you can argue about, like, to which degree. For example, a lot of people, me included, feel like Delver was always a little bit too pushed because it was an important piece in making Legacy, well, a little bit faster than it used to be before it came around. But that's like minor adjustments. But the general idea of there being a tempo deck that defines everything around it, that I feel could be really good for Pioneer. And I think they don't really have that. I guess they have Mono Black aggro, and then that's it. But that's more like a tap-out control. Oh, not control, tap-out aggro deck.
To me, one of the most important things about a format is it has to be like diverse, especially if it's like a non-rotating format. Like, you know, Modern and Legacy are pretty diverse, but obviously Modern has its own issues. But Pioneer, like, it hasn't shown the ability to be diverse yet, because the best thing you do is just going to be like the best thing. There aren't, like, I don't know. I think people are going to find ways to attack Field of the Dead and attack Mono Black aggro, and, you know, maybe they'll ban some more cards. But I guess my main worry is that, like, it could be a format where it's always like, okay, you can do like 3 or 4 things, and then the other things are just like going to be a lot worse than it. So we'll see. Maybe they can ban enough cards that it won't be the case. But that's basically my worry for Pioneer. My vision for a good Pioneer would be like the first week of Pioneer, where everybody was playing like interactive decks that like were like reasonable against each other before people figured out that like mono green was broken. So if we can get back to like that, then I think Pioneer could be a really good format. But I guess we will have to see.
And I've kind of like Julian been kind of waiting for people to shake out the format and also just wanting to focus on this GP. And then I'm planning to head into Pioneer, with a little bit of the metagame being figured out a little bit and hopefully the format being in a decent spot. That's my hope for when I start playing Pioneer, but I do plan to do that. And I am a little bit excited about the potential for the future of competitive Magic with the new changes to like your GP results being able to like compile on top of each other to help you qualify for the Pro Tour and things like that. So, Legacy, although Legacy is definitely by far my favorite as far as play style and the games go. I think in order for competitive Magic for me, I'll have to branch out a little bit, and hopefully there will still be some GPs in Legacy and reasons for me to play as much Legacy as I'd like to, but I also want to branch out a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's still going to be like good tournaments around, and I mean there has to, right? If there's not, there's nothing we can change too much about it, because you can organize all the tournaments you want if people aren't attending it. That's something you can't do too much about it. But I'm feeling I will be getting my Legacy fix anyway. Actually, when I was in Prague, my friend was telling me that they are actually working on getting another big Legacy tournament in Prague, which is actually kind of funny because, Bob, you mentioned, right, how everybody is like having children. That's creating children, having children these days, and they don't really have time to travel that much. And that's actually something that has been happening a lot in my local scene. And so my friend was telling me that they're actually having a tournament next year. Most likely they're still working on it in Prague, where people can bring their own children and their partners who might not be playing Magic, and then they can have a barbecue there, and they're organizing basically, like, I don't even know how to call it. I think they haven't picked a name yet, but a family hangout where you can play Magic.
Oh my God, that's like, okay, brilliant. I love that.
Yeah, I was wondering whether I could attend even if I didn't have children that I know about. They were like, "Oh yeah, sure." I hope that's.
You have to find children to bring to the tournament.
that's way too creepy. hey, child! If you come with me, I will give you a tropical island after the event.
Okay, that's
okay. Definitely way too creepy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think something, Bob, you mentioned that you want to talk about is the esports aspect of CFB and SCG's late decision about cutting some people from their writers roster.
Oh, yeah. So I know Channel Fireball cut PV. They're cutting some more people as well. I don't even know if I'm going to continue writing for them. It depends a little bit on budget. So CFB has started to move towards more esports related articles, and I'm interested to see what that really means. I guess we'll find out soon. SCG has also done similar things. They cut Tom Ross, who's been kind of really upset about it on Twitter, as well as Kevin Jones, who's a friend of mine. So it seems like these big, Magic companies are making moves towards what they think is like a better way to spend their money. And I'm kind of interested to see where it goes. I know people are kind of expressing frustration, like Tom especially was expressing frustration on Twitter because he felt like he wasn't given a chance, kind of. They just told him, oh, like, your numbers aren't that great, so therefore we're cutting you. So I can kind of see it from both sides, obviously. Like, as the writer, you're like a little bit disappointed because it's kind of abrupt. But then on the other side, it's like it's still a business. It's how capitalism works. For better or for worse, you can't just always expect to have a job. So I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing that Tom was especially sad about was how abrupt it was, right? He didn't really get any notice, or people were trying to help him get better numbers, which I guess in the end is his thing to worry about. But I can see how it would be. You would be very disappointed if something happened like this to you out of the blue. On the other hand, like you mentioned, right, if you're running SEG and you feel like, okay, I can spend this money in a better way and probably should, then eventually you definitely go for it. So I think Tom can't really, or probably isn't even sad about being cut in the first place, and more about the way he was cut from it. And I can totally understand that. But in the end, it's probably going to be a thing. Hopefully, he mentioned how he's like in a really bad spot in life right now. That will go away. And I mean, he's still like one of the best players. Actually, let's not get into that. There was like a discussion on whether Tom Ross is a tier 1 player when he was winning all those SEGs, and then there was like some actual Pro Tour pro, and he was like, well, Tom Ross isn't even a tier 3 player. But yeah, that was like many years ago. That's just popped up in my head. I think that's just a temporary episode. It's more like, is SEG actually also going to commit to more esports content? Because honestly, like for the great events they run, their website is like trash.
Well, they like revamped their website and half the links don't work anymore. But hopefully that'll get fixed. We'll see. I don't know if they're also like pursuing the esports angle. I know they're trying to make it like, they said they're trying to make everything more mobile friendly. Like they're basically trying to, upgrade and like, move towards what's like currently being done. But obviously there will be some growing pains. But I don't know. I mean, I'm definitely upset that they cut Legacy. I was hoping that they would like maybe keep it for half of the team tournaments, or maybe have like one open a year. But cutting it completely just seems like unnecessary. Because I think the numbers were like comparable to, they were much better than standard, and they were like, they weren't that much worse than modern or whatever. So I don't know. I still have issue with them cutting Legacy completely, but we'll see. I mean, Magic's definitely changing. I think as a whole, the pie is getting bigger. Like we see companies like Twitch running tournaments now, and like Red Bull coming and doing tournaments. So like I'm super stoked about that. I'm a little bit sad that it's all been like arena so far, but I guess quote unquote esports is what people care about. But maybe once they have like Pioneer on arena, I'll be more interested in it. But I don't know. I think the pie is getting bigger, and maybe that means that down the line things will be better for any like competitive Magic player, as long as you're willing to branch out. So we'll see.
Yeah, those Red Bull guys they're smart, They actually had this big tournament in Italy, in Florence, actually, in the summer. And you had to apply for that tournament. You had to be a streamer or a content creator, and you had to have these and these numbers. And I think, as it turns out, they pretty much accepted anyone who wanted to play in the tournament. It felt like a more prestigious thing. It's like, oh my God, I was actually accepted into the tournament. I gotta go now. And but yeah, I agree. Like, companies like Red Bull, or even like, I think it's called Twitch Rivals, right? They're putting, especially Twitch Rivals, so much money into Magic right now. These tournaments that they're having, that's like multi-thousands of dollars. Maybe, I don't want to like quote wrong numbers. We probably gotta look it up at some point. But that's when I saw how much people were winning in these Twitch rival events, I was blown away, because that's like well beyond what you would win in cheapies or stuff, I feel. So yeah, excited for that. Something else, I guess we probably don't want to discuss it too much, but something to make people aware of. If you have trample damage, better announce it. I guess there was a situation on the weekend where somebody attacked with a Reality Smasher, and it was blocked by a Gilded Goose, and the Reality Smasher was attacking Oko, a Planeswalker. And they put the Gilded Goose in the graveyard, and the attacking player never announced how they're actually distributing damage. And for those who are wondering what the fuck is going on, when you have trample damage, you actually can, if you really wanted to, put your entire trample damage on a blocking creature, even if it's just a 0-1, or in Gilded Goose's case, a 0-2, and not assign any damage to the Planeswalker or the defending player if it was attacked. And yeah, I thought it was like ruled incorrectly, because the ruling on the floor, I guess they got it, was that, the trample damage was quote unquote missed, and that Oko didn't take any damage. I thought it was like entirely wrong, because it feels wrong. But I talked to a couple of judges, and they agreed that if both players don't communicate about the trample damage, then the policy is, if there's a legal play that makes the entire scenario legal, then they won't like rewind or do anything, but they will assume that the legal play was made, which in this case was 5 damage to the blocking creature, even though it only has 2 toughness. And why that feels so wrong is because I think a lot of people, they don't really think of trample damage as a choice. They think about it as an automatic thing that just happens, right? That's automatically applied, like, okay, I need lethal damage to the blocker, and then the rest goes on top to either the player or the planeswalker. And that's why it feels so wrong. And because there's like this potential fix of assuming the legal play was made, that's how it works. But yeah, I talked to a local judge of mine. I think he's actually level 2 or 3. Like I think, I hope I'm not saying something wrong, but I think he's quite influential. And he said he's actually going to raise that issue with like other judges at GP and the corresponding people in place to at least review and look into how that is handled. Because I feel like I really want it to be that trample damage is assumed if both players don't communicate, that only lethal damage is applied to the creature and the rest to planeswalker or players.
But what about if somebody's blocking with like 2, what's the Eldrazi card? It's a 3/2, and if it dies, they get to like draw a card basically. Or I know which one you mean. Yeah. So what if they put 2 in front, and then you're trample, and you just wouldn't you rather just kill 1 and then they only get to draw 1?
Yeah, but
so what if they just start drawing 2?
Well, that's where communication comes in, right? Then if you actively say, okay, I'm gonna put 5 damage on this one and 0 on the other one.
So you're just saying that if there's only like an X1 in front, and then the rest of the damage would go to the player, then that should just be assumed.
I think if both players don't communicate, which is the big thing to me, right? If both players don't communicate, that's already a problem in the first place. And in that situation, I think the most intuitive thing that makes the least people happy or sad or angry should be applied. And I just feel like, I mean, the counter argument against that was raised to me was that, well, if that's assumed, if both players don't communicate and somebody attacks you with a reality smasher and you block with Llanowar Elves and you don't take 4 damage, then you will receive a warning. And that's a feel bad because it's an ability your opponent's card has, which is trample. And I see that can be a feel bad, but I think the other situation that was happening there is a much bigger feel bad. And I think that would alienate a lot of people from the game. Like I just like looking at my local LGS, and there's so many, like I would actually argue, especially at my LGS, which like has people that go to GPs and stuff, I'd be surprised if more than like 50% knew that trample damage can actually be assigned manually, and would create a pretty big feel bad for them if they ran into that situation. Some would even like be really turned off. Whereas if you received a warning because you didn't take damage of your opponent's trample creature, I think that's much more stomachable. That's much more like, you can be okay with that, because the other thing is so unintuitive.
Well, shouldn't it just be as simple? Should it just be as simple as when they go to write down the damage on their life pad, that like if we're writing down different numbers, like, oh, well, I'm obviously dealing trample damage. You can't just assume I'm not.
I mean, an Oko, like, you have to move the die, and I guess they didn't move the die. I mean, it's also worth noting on Magic Online, they actually, default is completely different. The default is you trample over. So, like, if you're not going to be consistent, then that's just like even worse for the players. So if I had to guess, they're going to change the rule and like fix the default trample setting. But to Julian's point, better communication is needed. Overall, my take on this whole situation is, an angle shooting in general, as someone who has been basically crucified for angle shooting, let me just tell you, it's not really worth it. Obviously, I had the whole pithing needle incident. This was like 4 years ago now, where my opponent needled Borborygmos instead of Borborygmos Enraged. And so then, like, I saw the judge, like, talk to the other judge, and I was like, Judge, did he name the wrong one? And the judge was like, yeah, you can activate Borborygmos. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll do it. And then once that happened, like, apparently everybody was like, oh my god, he's the worst angle shooter ever. And I was like, okay. Like, I definitely had some people come to my defense, but overall, it just leaves a bad feeling in a lot of the community's mouth. And to me, like, I understand that now. It just, like, even if the rule is, like, what it says it is, if it just feels unfair, people just don't like that. People just react negatively towards it. So I think you can have two choices. You can either own it and be like, I don't care what people think of me. I'm going to, do whatever it takes to win. Or you can be like, well, I guess this is actually a more fair way to deal with things, and I'm going to try and play in a way that I feel like I would want to play against. So, I mean, I've chosen kind of the second one. I'm like never going to angle shoot anymore because I realize how not worth it is. And I think my friend Zan is also kind of learning this lesson of like how much people kind of hate on you if you make plays like that. So, I mean, I think it's overall for the better. Like everybody's kind of has their own way of learning this lesson, I think.
Yeah, good point. I think one thing that in an ideal world, I wouldn't want like social pressure to be the defining factor that determines whether somebody goes for angle shooting or not. I'd really like love for policies to be in place or rules that prevent that in the first place, which isn't always possible, right? But I think in this scenario, by implementing the thing where default damage is applied, like on Matching Online, I think you could actually like work around having to need that social pressure to not do that in the first place. So let's see what comes of that. I think we are gonna wrap it up here, right? I'm gonna get the podcast out tonight, and then we're gonna see how things are gonna work out at the GP. Eric, I guess I'm gonna see you tomorrow. We're gonna hit that pizza place that Calum organized for us. It's actually gonna be a really big event. I think there's gonna be like almost 20 people or something.
That's what I heard.
Awesome.
I'm jealous. Next year I might come to the Euro GP. Hopefully it works out if there is one.
That'd be amazing,
cool.
right? That would be really cool. Awesome. So yeah, that's gonna be it. I want to give shout outs to everyone supporting us on Patreon. So if you want to support the cast and basically make this show run, you can head to patreon.com/itsjulian. No, actually that's the wrong one. You can head to patreon.com/everydayjournal and become a subscriber for our podcast. And if you see us at the GP, if you see Eric or me, just hit us up, and we are also going to have some Everyday Journal and Legacy Premier League stickers. I also want to give shout-outs to our Eternal Witness supporters, Matt and James, as well as our Grizzlebrand supporters, Batu, Scott, Kurish, and Jeremy. All of you have been supporting us for a really long time. I think some of you already received the stickers that I sent out. I'm actually going to send out a new batch of stickers very soon. That also is going to include the Legacy Premier League stickers. So thanks a lot for making the podcast work. Thanks a lot for listening today. Let us know how you liked it. We were told that it helps out a lot with search engine optimization and rankings. If you like the podcast, leave a review on iTunes. At least that's what the cool kids do. And yeah, so I think that's going to be it. And we're going to see you again to learn how things worked out for us at GP. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.